In a remote Christian village, nestled in the Balkans, a mother calls her son for supper. Her voice is calm. The day is ending like any other. But then, a new sound cuts through the twilight. The rhythmic beat of hooves, the clatter of armor. An Ottoman official, flanked by soldiers, rides into the village square. He unrolls a scroll. His voice is not angry, not hateful. It is bureaucratic, cold. This is not a raid. It is a collection. He reads the names. And when he reads the name of her son, the world stops. The boy is ripped from her arms. His pleas are ignored. Her screams fade into the distance as he is taken away. This was not a random tragedy. It was policy, a tax, but not a tax paid in gold or grain. This was the Devşirme, the blood tax. For centuries, this was the fate of thousands of the brightest, strongest Christian boys. But their story is not just one of loss. It is the story of one of history's most chilling and sophisticated acts of psychological engineering. The Ottoman Empire built a machine designed to perform a miracle of power, to take a child, erase his past, and rebuild him into the perfect servant. A slave whose only god was the Sultan, a warrior who would forget his own mother's face. This is how an empire manufactured loyalty, and how that creation eventually threatened to consume its masters. The scene in that village was not an isolated event. It was a routine, scheduled harvest. Every 3 to 7 years, Ottoman officials known as turnasabesi would fan out across the empire's European provinces. Their mission was precise, cold, and terrifyingly efficient. They were not looking for plunder. They were sourcing raw human material. This was the Devşirme, literally collecting or gathering. It was a formal, legalized institution, a tax imposed on the empire's non-Muslim subjects. But unlike other taxes, this one demanded their children. The targets were boys, typically between the ages of 8 and 14, though sometimes as young as 6. They were chosen from Christian communities, with a few exceptions, creating a steady pipeline of human potential from the conquered lands into the heart of the Ottoman power structure. The selection was not random violence. It was a calculated, bureaucratic process. The official, often accompanied by a local priest forced to comply, would arrive in a village and assemble all the boys. They were lined up, inspected, and judged. This was a human auction, where the currency was a future life of absolute service. The recruiters had a specific checklist. They were not just looking for brute strength. They were searching for the elite. First, they looked for physical perfection. Strong bones, healthy bodies, and no visible scars or deformities. These boys had to withstand years of grueling training. Second, and more importantly, they looked for intelligence and character. A bright, alert gaze was prized. They sought boys who were quick-witted and showed early signs of leadership. The most promising, the most handsome, intelligent, and poised were marked for the highest destiny. The imperial palace itself, where they could be groomed to become governors, admirals, or even the Grand Vizier, the Sultan's right hand. The others, still exceptional, were destined for the legendary Janissary Corps, the empire's elite infantry. For the parents, it was a day of unspeakable horror. Some families hid their sons in the forests or mutilated them to make them unsuitable. Some villages revolted, but resistance was futile. The empire's demand was absolute. The most valuable resource of a conquered people was not their land or their wealth, but their sons. And the Ottomans had perfected the system to harvest them. This was the beginning of a journey designed to make these boys the most powerful slaves in the world, by first making them forget they were ever free. The selected boys were now property of the state. Their first journey was a long, traumatic march towards the imperial heart, first to regional centers, and finally to the overwhelming city of Istanbul itself. This was not a journey of hope, but of erasure. With every step away from their villages, the Ottomans systematically severed their ties to the past. Bound together and guarded, the boys were forced to walk for weeks. The familiar landscapes of their childhood gave way to strange, foreign terrains. The food was different, the air smelled different, the sounds were different. This physical dislocation was a psychological weapon. It induced a state of shock and dependency, making them more pliable. Upon reaching a major city, the first official act of transformation began. They were herded into courtyards, stripped of their simple village clothes, the last tangible connection to their mothers who had sewn them. They were washed, their heads shaved. Then they were made to recite the Shahada, the Islamic declaration of faith. This was a forced conversion, a spiritual divorce from the religion of their fathers. It was the first brutal cut, symbolically killing the Christian boy to make room for the Ottoman servant. The most personal attack was yet to come. An official sat with a ledger, and one by one, the boys were brought forward. "Your name?" he would ask in Turkish, a language they did not understand. Before they could fumble an answer, he would write down a new one. Mehmed, Ali, Mustafa, Suleiman. Their birth names, the names their parents had whispered at their baptism, were gone, replaced by standardized Turkish and Islamic names. This was not just administrative. It was symbolic murder. Your name is the first gift your family gives you. The Ottomans took it back. They were forbidden from speaking their native tongue. Any boy caught speaking Greek, Serbian, or Albanian was severely punished. They were told, repeatedly, that their old lives were over. Their families were dead to them, and they were dead to their families. They now had only one father, the Sultan. They now had only one family, the Okak, the hearth of the state. The past was a locked door, and the Ottomans had thrown away the key. With their pasts erased, the boys were now blank slates, ready to be inscribed with a new purpose. They were sorted into a three-tiered system, a factory of loyalty where each workshop produced a different, but equally dedicated instrument of the state. The largest group was sent to live with Turkish farming families in Anatolia. This was not a gentle foster care program. It was a deliberate, harsh resocialization. Here, they performed hard manual labor, hardening their bodies under the sun. More importantly, they were fully immersed in the Turkish language and rural Islamic culture. This was the final, brutal cut from their ethnic roots. They learned the customs, the prayers, the very way of thinking of their masters. By the time they were recalled for formal military service years later, the village boy from the Balkans was gone, replaced by a toughened, Turkish-speaking Muslim youth, perfectly prepared to become a loyal cavalry soldier, a Sipahi. The most intellectually gifted and physically impressive boys were selected for the Enderun, the palace school in Topkapi Palace. This was the Ivy League of slavery. Within the most opulent walls in the world, they received the most demanding education imaginable. Their days were a brutal schedule of mind and body. They studied mathematics, law, theology, calligraphy, and music. They learned to speak Arabic and Persian. They were trained in the arts of war, swordsmanship, archery, horsemanship, and the arts of peace, etiquette, poetry, and statecraft. The pressure was immense. Failure was not an option. Mediocrity was punished. The goal was to create the empire's future elite. Grand Viziers, generals, and governors who were polymaths, warriors, and diplomats, yet who remained, legally, the Sultan's absolute slaves, with no power base but him. The rest, the backbone of the system, were destined for the Janissary Corps. Their training was less about philosophy and more about forging a single, unified weapon. Their lives were a model of Spartan discipline. They lived in barracks, trained constantly in formation fighting and the use of the musket and bow, and were subjected to a rigid code of conduct. But the final, masterful stroke of psychological engineering was their induction into the Bektashi Sufi order. The Bektashi dervishes, with their emphasis on discipline, humility, and a mystical devotion to the Sultan as a quasi-religious figure, became their spiritual guides. This provided a powerful, emotional substitute for the faith and family they had lost. The Corps became their new family, the barracks their home, the Sultan their father and God. This combination of relentless military drill and cult-like spiritual indoctrination produced a soldier unlike any other in the world. Fiercely loyal, emotionally detached, and utterly devoted to the hearth of the Janissary Brotherhood. They were the perfect soldiers because they had nothing else in the world to love. The system's final product was a paradox that defied all logic. The most powerful men in the Ottoman Empire were, legally, slaves. They were the kul, the Sultan's servants, and their existence redefined the meaning of loyalty. A boy stolen from a Greek village could become the Grand Vizier, wielding more authority than any born prince. A shepherd's son from Bosnia could rise to command the entire Ottoman navy. This was the system's brutal genius. These men had no dynasty to found, no noble house to elevate. They were utterly dependent on the Sultan's favor. Their power was not a threat to the throne. It was an extension of it. They were the perfect tools of the state, incredibly sharp but with no will of their own. Or so it seemed. Their loyalty was the empire's greatest strength. While European kings were betrayed by their own ambitious nobles, the Ottoman Sultan was served by men who owed him everything. They administered provinces, led armies, and collected taxes with an efficiency born of absolute devotion. They were the human pillars holding up the vast Ottoman dome. But how was this devotion sustained? It was a masterful psychological construct. The system replaced a boy's natural identity with a manufactured one of immense prestige and purpose. The intense camaraderie of the palace school or the Janissary barracks became a substitute for the family they lost. This new brotherhood was bonded in shared trauma and elite status. They were taught to see themselves as the chosen, the elite. The very hardship of their training was reframed as a sacred honor. This, combined with their total isolation from any past life, created a powerful cognitive dissonance. They were both exalted and owned. To question their role was to question their entire sense of self, the only self they could remember. Their devotion wasn't just fear. It was a deep-seated psychological need to belong to the powerful institution that had, paradoxically, both enslaved and exalted them. They were loyal because they had been perfectly brainwashed into having nothing else to be loyal to. But no system of control is perfect. The very mechanisms that created such fearsome loyalty eventually bred the empire's most formidable internal enemy. The machine, over centuries, began to consume itself. The first crack was success itself. As the Janissaries became the empire's essential military core, their power swelled. They gained privileges, the right to marry, to enroll their own sons in the corps, to engage in trade. The very slaves who were meant to have no family began to create dynasties of their own. The corps transformed from a merit-based elite into a conservative, self-interested political lobby. They realized their collective strength. The Sultan's perfect servants became his masters. They dictated policy, overthrew sultans they disliked, and assassinated reforming Grand Viziers. They resisted any military modernization like new artillery tactics that threatened their privileged position. The weapon forged to protect the empire was now pointed at its heart, holding progress hostage to preserve its own power. The culmination came in 1826. Sultan Mahmud II, watching the empire decay while the Janissaries stagnated, decided to destroy his own creation. He provoked a rebellion by forming a new, modern army. When the Janissaries rose up, as he knew they would, he was ready. In what became known as the Auspicious Incident, Ottoman artillery bombarded the Janissary barracks in Istanbul. The corps was trapped and massacred. Survivors were executed throughout the city. The Bektashi order that provided their spiritual backbone was suppressed. The system that had sustained the empire for nearly 5 centuries was eradicated in a single, bloody day. The perfect slaves were slaughtered by the master who had created them. A final, brutal testament to a system that worked too well for its own good. The echoes of the Devşirme system have long faded, but its lesson remains, carved not in stone, but in the annals of human ambition. This was the ultimate expression of state power, the power to not only take a life, but to overwrite it completely. It was a dark, centuries-long experiment in identity, a chilling attempt to engineer the human soul itself for the sole purpose of control. This leaves us with a profound and unsettling moral question. Was the Devşirme a brutal but brilliantly effective solution to the problem of governing a vast, multi-ethnic empire, creating a loyal elite unlike any other? Or was it a fundamental violation of humanity, a monstrous practice that, by its very design, was destined to create the very monster, the all-powerful, self-interested Janissary, that would eventually threaten to consume the empire from within? The story of the blood tax forces us to ask, at what point does the logic of power become a pathology? We want to hear your verdict. Where do you stand on the Devşirme? A necessary evil or an unforgivable crime? Let us know in the comments. If this journey into the dark heart of the Ottoman Empire captivated you, subscribe to the channel and ring the bell. Our next investigation will take us into another shadowy corner of history, where we'll uncover another forgotten secret of ultimate power. Until then, remember, the past is not just a story, it's a warning.